The morning of my brother's engagement party, I ironed a yellow dress I hadn't worn in 2 years and told myself it would be different this time. I told myself that a lot. It never was. My grandmother, Ruth Elaine Mercer, died 14 months ago in a pale blue room at Mercy General, holding my hand and not my father's. She smelled like lavender and old paperbacks. She called me her quiet one, not because I was timid, but because she said I thought before I spoke, a trait she admired and my family resented. She left me her house on Whitfield Lane. 3 bedrooms, a wraparound porch, a garden she tended every Saturday morning until she couldn't anymore. It wasn't a mansion. It was hers, and then it became mine. I didn't move in right away. I was still living 40 minutes away in a studio apartment near the hospital where I worked as a pediatric nurse. I had plans. Slow, careful plans. I told my father I needed a few months to figure things out, and he nodded like a man who had already figured things out for me. I should have known then. I should have noticed how quickly he stopped asking about the house, how my stepmother Sandra started referring to it in past tense, how my brother Marcus would smirk at nothing whenever Whitfield Lane came up in conversation. But I was tired from 12-hour shifts, and tired people miss things. That's what they counted on. The party was held in the backyard of the house I grew up in, my father's house, not mine. White string lights, catered appetizers on silver trays. Brittany, Marcus's fiancée, floated from group to group in a pale green dress, laughing that performance laugh people practice in mirrors. My father stood near the drink table looking like a man who had written the evening script and was waiting for everyone else to catch up to it. I arrived alone. I always arrived places alone. My stepmother Sandra air-kissed my cheek and told me the yellow dress was brave. I smiled and took a glass of sparkling water and found a spot near the rose bushes where I could be politely invisible. I was good at that. I had spent most of my life perfecting it. The evening moved the way these things do. Toasts, laughter, someone's uncle telling a story that was too long. Brittany cried happy tears when Marcus gave a little speech about the first time they met. I clapped. I genuinely did. Whatever I felt about my family, I had no quarrel with her. And then my father tapped his glass. He had the kind of voice that silenced rooms without effort. Deep, measured, the voice of a man who ran a mid-sized accounting firm and had never been told no by anyone who mattered to him. He smiled out at the gathered faces and said how proud he was, what a milestone this was, how Ruth would have been overjoyed to see her grandson starting his life with such a wonderful woman. My grandmother's name in his mouth always felt wrong, like he was borrowing something he'd never been given permission to touch. And then he said it. We are also thrilled to share that Claire has agreed to give Marcus and Brittany her grandmother's house on Whitfield Lane as a wedding gift. They'll move in next month. It's what Ruth would have wanted. The backyard went warm with applause. I stood very still. I heard someone near me say, "Oh, how generous." I heard Brittany gasp and say Marcus's name like a question. I heard Marcus laugh, that easy laugh of a man who has always expected the world to hand him things. And I thought, he already knew. He already knew. My father looked directly at me then, and his eyes said, "Smile. Stay quiet. Don't embarrass us in front of everyone." I had been doing exactly that for 28 years. I didn't agree to that, I said. It wasn't loud. I didn't shout. I set my glass down on the garden table beside me with a small, precise click, and I said it again, clearly, so there was no room for mishearing. I never agreed to give anyone that house. My father's smile didn't fall. It changed. It became the kind of smile that is actually a warning. Claire. His voice was soft, which was worse than if he had raised it. That house is mine, I said. Grandma left it to me. I haven't agreed to give it to Marcus or to anyone. The applause had stopped. Somewhere near the back, a child asked her mother something and was quickly hushed. Brittany had gone very still. My father took 2 steps toward me. Not fast. Never fast. He was a man who believed that controlled movement conveyed authority. "You are making a scene at your brother's engagement party," he said quietly, close enough now that only I could hear him. "You made an announcement about my property without my permission," I said, and then his hand closed around my forearm, not gently, and he pulled. Not a shove exactly, more of a sharp, dismissive yank, the kind that says you are a thing I can move. My heel caught the edge of the stone path, and I went sideways into the garden table. The glass I'd set down shattered. The edge of the table caught my shoulder and in the back of my head, and for a moment the string lights above me doubled. I remember Sandra saying very crisply, "She's being dramatic." I remember Brittany making a small wounded sound. I remember my brother not moving. The next thing I remember clearly is a stranger's living room and an ice pack and a woman named Joanna, who turned out to be a nurse practitioner who had been standing 3 feet away when I fell and had calmly taken charge while my family stood frozen in embarrassment rather than concern. She drove me to the urgent care clinic on Route 9 and sat with me while they checked for a concussion, which I didn't have, and photographed the bruising on my arm and shoulder, which they did at her insistence. "Do you want to file a report?" the intake nurse asked. I thought about my father's face. I thought about how he had already announced my property away in front of 40 people. I thought about my grandmother's voice, low and steady. "The ones who take from you are counting on you to be too tired to fight back, sweetheart." "Yes," I said, "I do." The officer who took my statement was a woman named Officer Bautista. She had short, dark hair and a way of writing things down that made you feel every word was being handled carefully. She asked me to walk her through the evening. I did, slowly. She asked about prior incidents. I told her there were none physical. She asked about the property announcement. I told her about Whitfield Lane, about the will, about the fact that I had not signed anything, had not agreed to anything. She gave me a case number and her card and told me to contact her if anything else happened. When Joanna dropped me at my apartment that night, I sat on the edge of my bed in my yellow dress and looked at my phone. 11 messages from Sandra, 4 from my father, 1 from Marcus that said, "You always have to make everything about yourself." I didn't answer any of them. I opened my email instead and searched for a name I had saved a year ago, the day after my grandmother's funeral, when her estate lawyer had handed me a card and said, "In the parking lot, quieter than necessary, if anyone gives you trouble about the Whitfield property, you call me first." His name was Arthur Caldwell. Caldwell and Associates, Estate and Property Law. I wrote a short email. I told him what had happened at the party. I attached the photos the urgent care clinic had sent me. I wrote at the bottom, "I think something may have been happening with the house that I don't know about." I didn't sleep much. Around 2 in the morning, I got up and made tea and sat at my kitchen table and went through my finances the way I always did when I was anxious, methodically, line by line. And that was when I noticed something I had looked past a dozen times before. A recurring transfer, small, quarterly, coming from an account I didn't recognize, going into a joint savings account I had almost forgotten about, one my grandmother and I had opened together when I was 19 so she could help me save for nursing school. I had stopped checking it once I graduated. I had just assumed it was sitting empty. It wasn't. 12 transfers over the past 8 months, each one labeled WF Property Management Fee Return. I stared at the screen until the words stopped making sense, and then I read them again until they made too much sense. Someone had been renting my house. Someone had been collecting that rent, and a small portion of it had been deposited into an account my father knew about and apparently assumed I never checked. I photographed everything. Arthur Caldwell called me at 8:15 the next morning. His voice was the same as I remembered it, measured, careful, the voice of a man who understood that information was a form of architecture. He asked me to come in that day if I could. I called the hospital and arranged to swap my shift and was at his office by 10. He laid it out methodically. My father had contacted him 6 months ago, claiming to be acting on my behalf as a financial guardian, a designation that did not exist in my grandmother's will and had no legal standing. When Caldwell had pushed back, my father had stopped communicating with him and gone around him entirely, approaching a property management company directly with a lease agreement bearing what appeared to be my signature. It was not my signature. I looked at the photocopy Caldwell slid across his desk. The Claire Mercer on that document curved its letters differently than I did. My A's had a particular closed top that this one didn't. My R's looped back. These didn't. "Forgery," Caldwell said, not as a question. "I've never signed anything for that house," I said. "Not one document." He nodded like this confirmed what he already suspected. The tenant has been paying rent for 8 months. The management company dispersed to an account your father controls. He's been forwarding a small percentage to the joint account, likely to create a paper trail suggesting your awareness and consent. I thought about those quarterly transfers I had never investigated. The way he had built a trail of apparent compliance around my inattention. "How much?" I asked. He told me. I sat with that number for a moment. "What can we do?" I asked. Caldwell folded his hands on his desk. He had the look of a man who had been waiting for this question for 6 months. "We file a petition for immediate enforcement of the will and title transfer formalization, which should have happened at probate and was deliberately stalled. We notify the tenant of the actual ownership situation. We refer the forged signature to the district attorney's office, and we recover the misappropriated rental income through civil proceedings." He paused. "Your grandmother built a very specific clause into this document," he said. "She anticipated interference. She told me when she drafted this that she wanted you protected even if you didn't know you needed protecting yet." He looked at me steadily. She knew her son. I thought about her hands, papery and warm, holding mine in that pale blue hospital room. I thought about how she had never said a direct bad word about my father in my presence, but how she had always made sure I had my own money, my own account, my own path. Every gift she gave me came with a quiet lesson in independence. She had known. Of course she had known. She had just hoped I wouldn't need the backup. I needed the backup. That afternoon, Caldwell filed the petition. Officer Bautista called me to follow up on the assault report, and I told her about the forgery. She connected me with a detective in the financial crimes unit named Harris, who asked me to bring in every document I had, which I did the next morning. I went back to my apartment, and I did not return my family's calls. My father tried 3 times. Sandra tried twice. Marcus sent a text that said, "Dad told us what you're doing. You need to stop this. Brittany is devastated." I thought about Brittany, genuinely. I thought about how she had gone still at the party, how her expression in that moment had looked less like happiness interrupted and more like someone realizing they had been handed a story that wasn't quite true. I texted her directly, her number from a group message we'd been on once. I told her I was sorry the party went the way it did. I told her the house situation wasn't about her and Marcus building a life. It was about the fact that I had never been asked. I told her that if she and Marcus wanted to talk, genuinely talk, I was open to that. She replied 4 hours later with one line, "I didn't know he hadn't asked you. I'm so sorry." I believed her. I didn't reply to anyone else. The following week moved in a strange, suspended way. I worked my shifts. I ate regular meals. I watered the 2 plants on my windowsill. I slept more than I had in months, which surprised me until I realized how much energy I had been spending for years on being braced for something I could never quite name. Caldwell called me on Thursday. The title transfer had been formalized. The Whitfield Lane house was officially and unambiguously mine. The management company had been notified of the true ownership, the current lease voided as fraudulently obtained, and the tenant offered proper documentation and communication going forward. They had been innocent in all of it, simply renting in good faith from someone who had presented convincing papers. The district attorney's office had accepted the forgery referral. Detective Harris confirmed they were proceeding with a fraud investigation. On Friday, I arranged to go to Whitfield Lane with my friend Denise from the hospital and pick up the spare key from the management company lockbox. I hadn't been inside in 8 months, since before my father had apparently decided my silence was the same as permission. The house smelled like closed rooms and my grandmother's particular brand of cedar-scented drawer liners. The furniture was all still there. The bookshelves in the front room lined with paperbacks she had read twice. The kitchen curtains she had sewn herself, yellow with small white flowers. The garden out back, overgrown now. The roses she planted the summer I turned 12, leggy and reaching. I stood in the kitchen for a long time. Denise stood in the doorway and didn't say anything, which was why I had brought her and not someone who would feel obligated to fill silence. "I'm going to fix the garden first," I said eventually. She nodded. "I'll bring coffee." I spent the afternoon pulling weeds. I wasn't ready to cry yet, and I wasn't ready to celebrate yet, but I was ready to do something with my hands that felt like a beginning. My father called at 4:30. I let it ring. He called again at 5. I let it ring again. Then he sent a text, and it was the kind of text that showed me exactly who I had always been dealing with, underneath the controlled voice and the accounting firm and the string lights in the backyard. You have embarrassed this family in front of everyone we know. You have brought investigators to my door over a misunderstanding. I hope you are proud of yourself. I read it once. I put my phone face down in the grass. I kept pulling weeds. Caldwell called the following Monday. The DA had issued a formal notice. There would be charges: forgery in the first degree, fraudulent misrepresentation, misappropriation of estate assets. My father had retained a lawyer. There were also, Caldwell told me, civil proceedings attached, a demand for repayment of 8 months of rental income, plus interest, plus attorney fees. He'll try to settle, Caldwell said. Let him try, I said. Sandra called me that night. Not my father this time. Sandra, which surprised me. I answered because I was curious, which I recognized was probably not the best reason. Her voice was tight and small in a way I had never heard before. She said things like, "This has gone too far, and you're destroying your father's career, and he made a mistake, Claire. People make mistakes." She said Brittany was crying every day. She said Marcus couldn't focus on his work. She said my grandmother would have wanted the family to stay together. I listened to all of it. And then I said, he signed my name on a legal document without my permission. He rented out property that wasn't his. He's been collecting money from my grandmother's house for 8 months and putting most of it in his own account. Those aren't mistakes. Those are choices. Silence. He put his hand on me in front of 40 people, I said. I have the photographs. More silence. I want my grandmother's house, and I want the money he took, and I want him to face what he did, I said. That's it. That's all I want. I'm not trying to destroy anyone. I just stopped letting people destroy me. She hung up. I sat with the quiet for a while. It didn't hurt the way I thought it would. It felt more like setting something down that I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. 3 weeks later, my father settled. Full repayment of the misappropriated rent. Attorney fees covered. A formal acknowledgement drafted by Bull's legal teams that the lease had been obtained fraudulently. The DA's office accepted a plea on the forgery charge, reduced, with conditions including community service and a probationary period, and a fine that I was told was meaningful. He did not serve jail time. I won't pretend that didn't sting. My lawyer had been honest with me from the beginning. First-time offender, professional standing, no prior record. The system does what it does. But his name was in the county records. The firm put him on administrative leave pending review. His standing in the neighborhood where he had spent 30 years carefully building an image shifted in the way that image-built things shift when the image cracks. Not all at once, but completely. Marcus called me once, about a month after the settlement. He sounded different on the phone, quieter, less like the version of himself that I had grown up watching my father manufacture. He said he hadn't known about the forgery. I believed him because believing it cost me nothing and doubting it would have cost me something. He said he was sorry about the engagement party. He said Brittany was actually the one who had pushed him to call. I thanked him for that. I didn't invite him to the house. Not yet. Maybe not for a long time. But I didn't hang up on him either, and that felt like its own small kind of progress. I moved into Whitfield Lane on a Saturday in October when the maples on the block had gone the color of old pennies. Denise helped me carry boxes. My coworker Pat brought a casserole and a bottle of wine and left after an hour because she understood the difference between celebrating with someone and crowding them. I unpacked my grandmother's kitchen in the order I thought she would have wanted. The everyday dishes first, then the good ones, then the coffee mugs with their chips and their histories. I found, in the third drawer from the left, a note in her handwriting on the back of an old grocery receipt. It was undated. "This house has good bones, Claire. So do you. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." I don't know when she wrote it. I don't know when she wrote it there for me, or if it was just something she wrote to herself and forgot. It didn't matter. I pressed it flat and tucked it into the book on my nightstand and went to bed in her house, my house, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, I didn't lie awake waiting for the sound of footsteps or a voice calling through the dark to tell me I had done something wrong. There was just the sound of the October wind in the maple tree outside the window. There was just the quiet that was finally mine. People ask me sometimes, when I tell pieces of this story, whether I regret any of it, whether the settlement was enough, whether I wish I had spoken sooner, or louder, or differently. I turn the question over and look at it from each side before I answer. Here's what I know. I spent 28 years being the person in my family who held the spotlight steady while someone else stood in it. I did it because I thought that was what love required. I did it because conflict felt like a risk I couldn't afford. I did it because my father's certainty and my stepmother's sweetness and my brother's ease had all quietly, consistently communicated that my comfort mattered less than their convenience. I know that this is not an unusual story. I know that right now, somewhere, there is a woman reading a grocery receipt in a drawer and wondering if she is allowed to keep the thing she was given. I know that there is someone sitting on the edge of a bed in a yellow dress, listening to messages she doesn't want to answer, and trying to decide if what happened to her is real enough to be worth the cost of saying so. It is real enough. You are real enough. The cost is high, and it is worth it. When my father made his announcement at that party, he was counting on the same thing he had always counted on, that I would calculate the price of resistance and decide it was too steep. He had built a whole architecture of assumption around my silence. What he didn't know was that my grandmother had been quietly, carefully handing me the tools to dismantle it for years. She gave me the house. But what she really gave me was the example. A woman who thought before she spoke. A woman who planned for the long game. A woman who tucked notes in kitchen drawers and left backup plans in legal language and knew all along that someday someone was going to need a door. I am not a loud person. I never have been. I did not shout in that backyard. I did not send long, angry messages. I made phone calls. I gathered documents. I showed up to offices with files in my hands, and I let the law say the things I didn't need to perform. My silence was never their permission. It was just patience, waiting to become something else. Now, when I sit on the porch on Sunday mornings with my coffee, watching the garden my grandmother planted come slowly back from the neglect of the past year, I think about how the roses she put in the ground when I was 12 are still reaching, how they grew through a whole season of nobody tending them and still found their way to the light. Some things are stubborn like that. Some things know without being told that they belong exactly where they are. I am one of them. I finally know it, and I am staying.